Women's representation matters, and in the museum field, we have a very long way to go. This data from 2018 shows that in major art museum collections, 85% of collections are white and 87% male in 2018. So yes, women do need to see themselves in museums, but women's representation matters because everyone, men, women, non-gender conforming, need to see diverse stories of women. And not just women as extraordinary individuals, but women as indelible actors in our national and global histories. We know what we have to do, right? We know that we need to increase diverse representations of women, and we can clearly see why that matters. But the question is always how? How do we create accurate, inclusive representations of women in our trusted museum spaces? In the words of one of my personal heroes, the self-described Black lesbian mother warrior poet Audre Lorde, by being deliberate and afraid of nothing. So 60% of museum staff today may be women, but my position, curatorial, is notoriously one of the whitest. So especially when I am the only non-white woman in the room, I have to be deliberate and unafraid to say, not all women's experiences are the same. Representations of women must include and not be limited to Black women, Afro-Latinas, immigrant women, gay women, Native women, Asian women, African women, trans women, Muslim women, intersex women, incarcerated women, women over 65, undocumented women, girls, right? I could go on and on and on because the underrepresented women are long. And this is not meant to be divisive, it's just meant to be honest, right? Not all women could vote in 1920. We can't say we want diversity and then completely disregard it. So if we sincerely want to change the dominant narrative, we have to start with intersectionality and discrimination and privilege, historically and through a contemporary lens. I am deliberate and unafraid to balance museum representations of women. So Celia Cruz is the queen of salsa. This fellow Afro-Latina sang from the rumble in the jungle in Zaire all the way to Sesame Street, was posthumously awarded a Lifetime Achievement Grammy, is in 5 different Smithsonian Museum collections. So the National Postal Museum, the Anacostia Community Museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the National Museum of American History, and the National Portrait Gallery, right? So clearly I love her. So, so I understand firsthand how museums can emotionally connect us with the physical evidence of famous lives. We regularly show extraordinary women like Celia Cruz, as we should. But museums struggle to honor some women's everyday existence. And as a curator, I'm empowered to change that narrative. So I reject the earned worthiness idea of respectability politics and stereotypical notions of femininity and desirability that have influenced how we see women and which women we see. Women creators and curators are choosing authenticity, like Corinne Simpson's beautiful photograph of a young Black woman with door knocker earrings and braids. And this speaks directly to me and Black women like me, whose hair has been regulated and legislated, and whose general aesthetic has been considered less than. So I honor the beauty and the importance of the extraordinary with the beauty and the relatability of the everyday. I am deliberate and unafraid to center women's stories where you don't even see a woman. This is a pen with the NBA logo of a man, Jerry West, right, if we're gonna be accurate. But this is women's history. Michelle Roberts, executive director of the National Basketball Players Association, used this pen. She's the first woman to lead a major US pro sports union. And I love that in 2017, after signing a collective bargaining agreement, my colleagues didn't collect anything that she wore. I think too often museums rely on portraits and clothing to represent women. So from Michelle Roberts, a Black woman, we have this, all business. And of course, one of my favorite stories. You look at this and see a carving of a spider web and a spider representing Anansi or Bonansi or Aunt Nancy, a character that originated in West Africa, traveled via the transatlantic slave trade, and rooted all over the African diaspora. I see women's history. Deborah Nazareno sat on this seat while traveling the water routes in her home community of Esmeraldas, Ecuador. And she sat on this seat in her home as she told Afro-descendant stories like Anansi to her grandson, Juan. In 2005, Deborah's grandson, Juan Garcia Salazar, brought this seat from Ecuador to Washington, D.C. And after a long conversation and a little bit of storytelling, he offered it to Lonnie Bunch. On that day, Deborah Nazareno's humble wooden boat seat became the very first object donated to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It is encased in our fourth floor Cultural Expressions Gallery and has been seen by over 6 million visitors from all over the world. This is how women's everyday experiences belong in museums. Women's representation matters, and diverse representations of women matter. So everything I've shown you is from Smithsonian collections, the majority from my home museum. So this doesn't have to be aspirational. This is how we work. The Smithsonian highlights women's contributions from the quotidian to the extraordinary. But I think most importantly, we are creating a culture in which the absence of women's representation is unacceptable. So on behalf of the Smithsonian's American Women's History Initiative, of which I'm a part, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where I have the privilege to work, we are deliberate and completely unafraid to be a part of this women-led revolution with you. So happy International Women's Day. Thank you.